Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care. Sergeant Daniel Blake stood at the edge of the shuttle ramp, eyes fixed on the horizon of Nithara. The alien planet's sky shimmered with a pale lavender hue, casting soft light over the sprawling city below. Its towering structures of iridescent stone twisted into intricate spirals, gleaming like jewels beneath the twin suns. The air felt different, charged with a strange energy, as if the very atmosphere was alive with secrets untold. "This is it," Daniel muttered under his breath, adjusting the straps on his uniform. His hand brushed over the old earth patch sewn on his sleeve, a reminder of home, a world that seemed impossibly far away now. "First contact mission to an all-female society," his commanding officer had said back on Earth. "You'll be the first human male they've ever seen. No pressure." Yeah, no pressure, Daniel thought, as he descended the ramp with the rest of his team. He was flanked by diplomats and scientists, people who spoke the language of peace and negotiation. He, on the other hand, was a soldier. His language was conflict and combat, not cultural exchanges or diplomacy. But orders were orders, and this mission was important. Humanity needed allies, and the Nitharans could be a valuable one. The alien women awaited them at the base of the ramp, their regal forms standing tall and still. Dressed in flowing robes of deep blues and greens, they were striking in appearance. Tall, with elongated limbs, shimmering skin that seemed to reflect the light, and large, glowing eyes that held both wisdom and curiosity. Their faces were framed by silver hair, which flowed like liquid metal down their backs. Each one of them exuded a sense of grace and power, a confidence that told of a long, unbroken reign over their world. One figure stood out among them, Princess Illyria, the daughter of the Nitharan Empress. Her eyes were fixed on Daniel from the moment he stepped off the ramp, unblinking and intense. There was something in her gaze, an almost predatory curiosity, that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. He had been briefed on their culture, of course. Nitharans were a matriarchal society, a civilization that hadn't seen males in thousands of years. Their legends spoke of males as ancient, powerful beings, long extinct. They reproduced through advanced genetic technology, and the very concept of males had faded into myth. But myths had a way of lingering in the mind. "Welcome to Nithara," Illyria spoke, her voice soft but commanding. "We are honored by your presence, humans from a distant world. We have heard much of your species, but seeing you in person is different." Her eyes lingered on Daniel as she said this, her head tilting slightly as if she were trying to decipher some hidden truth about him. Daniel cleared his throat, feeling the weight of their attention. "Thank you, Princess. We come in peace and hope to establish a lasting friendship between our people." Illyria smiled faintly, though her eyes remained fixed on him. "I'm sure we will have much to discuss." As the diplomatic team exchanged formalities, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, closely, intently. The alien women surrounding them were subtle, but their fascination with him, the lone male, was unmistakable. He caught glimpses of them whispering to one another, their eyes darting towards him with a mix of awe and wonder, as though he were some ancient relic brought to life. For Daniel, it was unsettling. He had been in combat zones, fought on hostile planets, but this was a different kind of pressure. He wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was clear. These women were intrigued by him, and that intrigue carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. As the diplomatic procession moved through the streets of Nithara, Daniel couldn't help but marvel at the alien architecture. The city was a fusion of organic beauty and technological marvels, with towering spires that seemed to grow from the ground, wrapped in shimmering vines of light. The people moved with a serene grace, their garments flowing like water around them, blending into the ethereal surroundings. Every detail spoke of an advanced, peaceful civilization that had evolved without the influence of war or male-dominated power structures. But while the city was awe-inspiring, Daniel couldn't ignore the growing unease in his chest. The stares had not stopped since they arrived, It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was as if the Nitharan women were studying him, trying to understand something that had been lost to them for millennia. He caught more than one pair of glowing eyes glancing at him, lingering for a moment too long, and then quickly turning away. "Sergeant, you doing all right?" came a voice from beside him. It was Dr. Elaine Peters, one of the scientists assigned to the mission. She was sharp, both in mind and tongue, and had a habit of reading people like open books. "Yeah," Daniel grunted. "Just not used to being a walking museum exhibit." Elaine chuckled softly. "It's not every day they see a man, you know. The concept is probably blowing their minds." "Yeah, well, I didn't sign up for this to be ogled at," he muttered under his breath. "I'm a soldier, not a curiosity." Elaine patted his arm. "Relax. You'll be fine. Just don't do anything too masculine." Before Daniel could respond, they reached the central courtyard where the Nitharan delegation had prepared a welcoming ceremony. The large open space was surrounded by spiraling towers, and in its center stood a platform adorned with holographic images of ancient Nitharan deities, beautiful, powerful women with no mention of males in their stories. Princess Illyria ascended the platform, her silver hair flowing behind her like a liquid veil. She raised her hands, and the entire courtyard fell into silence. "We welcome our human guests," Illyria began, her voice carrying across the space. "This is a momentous occasion, for we have long awaited the chance to meet another intelligent species, one that comes from a place beyond our stars." Her eyes flicked to Daniel again, and for a moment, he felt like she was speaking directly to him. "As you know, our society is built upon the principles of harmony, wisdom, and strength. For thousands of years, we have thrived without the need for males, thanks to our advanced technologies. But today, we meet a species where males still play a significant role." The crowd of Nitharan women shifted, their collective attention once again focusing on Daniel. He swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of their gaze even more. Illyria continued, her voice soft but commanding. "It is said that males were once a part of our world, long ago, but they are now a distant memory, a myth. Today, we are faced with a reality that has long been forgotten. We hope that, through this exchange, we will learn not just about your technology, but about your people, about you." The way she said "you" sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. It was clear now, he wasn't just another member of the delegation. He was the member, the one they were most curious about, the one they didn't understand. As the ceremony ended, Daniel was approached by Tara, Illyria's closest confidant, and a skilled warrior who had been eyeing him with suspicion since they landed. "Sergeant Blake," she said, her voice clipped. "I understand you are a soldier?" Daniel nodded. "That's right." Tara studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Our people have no need for soldiers. We resolved our conflicts centuries ago. Tell me, what is the role of a male soldier in your society?" Daniel hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "Well, it's not just about fighting, it's about protecting, ensuring peace." "Through violence," Tyra interrupted, her tone cold. Daniel frowned. "Sometimes, yes, but it's not something we seek out. It's a last resort." Tara's lips tightened. "A primitive solution?" Before Daniel could respond, Illyria joined them, her presence diffusing the tension. "Tara, let's not judge too quickly. Our guests have come a long way. We should learn from them before making assumptions." Tara bowed her head slightly, but didn't seem entirely convinced. Daniel could tell she didn't trust him, or at least, she didn't trust what he represented. Illyria smiled warmly at Daniel. "Come, Sergeant. There is much we can learn from one another. I'm particularly interested in understanding the dynamics between males and females in your society. It must be fascinating." Daniel felt the knot in his stomach tighten again. This was going to be more difficult than he had imagined. The sun had begun to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the courtyard as Daniel followed Princess Illyria and Tara through the winding streets of the capital. The day had been a whirlwind of ceremonies, introductions, and formalities, and Daniel felt like he was navigating a maze of cultural protocols he barely understood. The constant attention from the Nitharan women only added to the complexity of the situation. As they walked, Illyria glanced over at him. I hope you don't mind, Sergeant, but I'd like to continue our discussions in a more private setting. There is much I wish to understand about you. And about men. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice steady. Of course, Princess. I'm here to help in any way I can. Tara, who was walking slightly behind them, crossed her arms. Our society is founded on order and peace, but I can't help but question whether bringing a male here will disrupt that balance. Daniel tried to keep his expression neutral. It was clear Tara was wary of him, not just as a soldier, but as a male, a concept she had likely only read about in ancient texts. He wanted to diffuse the tension, but wasn't sure how. I'm just here to help our two worlds understand each other, he said carefully. I don't want to cause any problems. Illyria's eyes sparkled with curiosity. You're not causing problems, Sergeant. On the contrary, I believe your presence is enlightening. I have so many questions, and I hardly know where to begin. Daniel felt a flicker of unease. There was something intense in her gaze, something more than just diplomatic curiosity. He wasn't sure if it was fascination or something deeper, but it made him feel exposed. They reached a large domed building, where Illyria led him inside. The interior was grand and elegant, with sweeping arches and a soft, glowing light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It was a private hall, likely a place reserved for important meetings or personal discussions. We call this the Hall of Reflection, Illyria explained, gesturing to the shimmering walls. It's where we come to meditate, to contemplate the greater questions of our existence. I thought it fitting for our discussion. Tara remained by the entrance, her posture tense. I will stay here to ensure everything remains appropriate. Daniel caught the edge in her voice but didn't comment. Illyria, on the other hand, waved a dismissive hand. Tara, please, you worry too much. Sergeant Blake is an honored guest. Tara didn't argue but kept her eyes fixed on Daniel, as if daring him to step out of line. Illyria moved to sit on one of the low cushions that were arranged in a circle on the floor, motioning for Daniel to sit across from her. He hesitated only briefly before lowering himself onto the cushion. The softness was a stark contrast to the tension in the air. For a moment, Illyria simply looked at him, her glowing eyes scanning his features as if committing them to memory. Tell me, Sergeant, she began softly. What is it like to be a man in your society? What roles do you play? How do you differ from women? Daniel shifted slightly, caught off guard by the directness of the question. Well, I guess that depends on the culture. But in most human societies, men and women work together. We don't have strict roles anymore, not like in the past. Men and women can both be soldiers, scientists, leaders. Illyria tilted her head, her silver hair cascading over one shoulder. Interesting. In your society, males are not seen as dominant? Daniel chuckled lightly, unsure of how to answer. I mean, it depends on where you go, but generally no, we've moved past that. It's more about what people can do, not what they are. Illyria nodded thoughtfully, her fingers playing with the edge of her robe. And yet, males are still seen as physically different. Stronger, perhaps? Daniel felt the tension build again. Physically, maybe, but strength comes in many forms. It's not just about muscle. Illyria's eyes seemed to sparkle at his words, as though she had just heard something profound. Fascinating. I've read about such things, but hearing it from a living male, it's something else entirely. Tyra, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. And what about control? Men are often described as aggressive, prone to violence. Can you control that nature, Sergeant? Daniel met her gaze, his jaw tightening. We control ourselves, just like anyone else. Aggression is a part of survival, sure, but we don't give in to it. Not if we don't have to. Tara's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Illyria leaned forward, her voice almost a whisper. I believe that in time, we will understand one another better, Sergeant Blake. There is so much we can learn from you. Her gaze lingered on him for a beat too long, and Daniel felt his skin prickle under her scrutiny. He wasn't sure where this was going, but it was clear now that Illyria's interest wasn't purely academic. She was intrigued by him in a way that went beyond diplomacy, beyond cultural exchange. Just then, a soft chime echoed through the hall, signaling the end of the formal discussions for the day. Illyria rose gracefully, her robe trailing behind her as she stood. "It seems we must pause our conversation for now, Sergeant, but I do hope we can continue this later." Daniel stood as well, his mind racing. "Of course, Princess. I'm at your service." Illyria's smile was warm, but there was something else in her eyes. "Good. I look forward to it." As they left the Hall of Reflection, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was becoming more complicated than he had anticipated. Illyria's fascination with him was growing, and Terra's distrust wasn't far behind. He would have to tread carefully. The days that followed felt like a blur of events and ceremonies, with Daniel finding himself more and more the center of attention. The Natharan women, once discreet in their curiosity, now openly asked him questions about human males, their lives, and their role in society. While most of the conversations were polite, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was brewing beneath the surface, especially with Princess Illyria. On the fourth day of the mission, Daniel was invited to observe a Natharan combat training session. Illyria had suggested it after their conversations about human soldiers and combat tactics, eager to show him how her people maintained their physical prowess, despite the lack of conflict for centuries. The training grounds were an expansive arena of soft, glowing stone that seemed to pulse with life. Natharan warriors, all female and dressed in lightweight combat gear, moved with an elegant precision, their movements fluid and sharp as they sparred with each other using long, sleek staffs that crackled with energy. Daniel stood at the edge of the arena, watching with growing admiration. These women were fast, stronger than they looked, and their coordination was almost mesmerizing. Illyria stood beside him, observing his reactions closely. "Our combat techniques are designed for efficiency and grace," she explained. "We do not engage in war, but we believe in keeping our bodies and minds sharp. I understand that human soldiers rely more on brute force." Daniel shook his head. "Not always. We rely on strategy, on reading our opponents, using their weaknesses against them. It's not just about strength, it's about outsmarting your enemy." Illyria smiled. "Perhaps we are not so different after all." As they spoke, Terra, who had been leading the training session, approached them. She had been sparring with another warrior, her face glistening with sweat, but her expression focused and intense. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel as she stopped in front of Illyria. "Would you like to demonstrate some of your techniques, Sergeant?" Terra asked, her voice edged with challenge. "It would be enlightening to see a male in combat." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't keen on putting on a show, especially not when the entire training ground had paused to watch him. But he could sense the unspoken tension between Terra and Illyria. This was more than just curiosity. It was a test. "I don't think that's necessary," Daniel replied cautiously. "I'm here to observe, not participate." Illyria, however, seemed intrigued by the idea. "I think it would be fascinating, Sergeant. Please, show us." With no polite way to refuse, Daniel nodded. "All right, but I'll need a partner." Terra stepped forward without hesitation, her staff in hand. "I'll be your partner." Daniel suppressed a sigh. He had a feeling this was going to happen. The two of them entered the center of the arena, the other Natharan warriors forming a loose circle around them. Illyria watched from the sidelines, her eyes gleaming with interest. The air was thick with anticipation, and Daniel could feel the weight of 100 eyes on him. Terra spun her staff expertly, the crackling energy humming through the air as she took her stance. Daniel dropped into a defensive position, his eyes locked on hers. He could tell by the way she moved that she was fast, too fast for him to rely on brute force alone. The sparring match began, and Terra attacked first, her staff swinging with a speed that caught Daniel off guard. He dodged, barely avoiding the crackling energy, and countered with a quick strike of his own, aiming to disarm her. But Terra was quick, parrying his move with ease. For several moments they moved in a rapid exchange of blows and dodges, neither of them gaining the upper hand. Daniel was impressed by Terra's skill. She was faster and more agile than any opponent he had faced before. But he had something she didn't: unpredictability. As Terra came in for another strike, Daniel feinted, making her believe he was going to block high. Instead, he swept low, hooking his leg behind hers and knocking her off balance. Terra stumbled, But before she could recover, Daniel disarmed her with a swift motion, sending her staff clattering to the ground. The crowd of Nitharan warriors gasped softly, their eyes widening in surprise. Illyria's smile grew, a look of admiration crossing her features. Teyra, breathing heavily, picked herself up from the ground, her eyes flashing with a mixture of frustration and respect. "You fight well, Sergeant," she admitted grudgingly. "For a male." Daniel chuckled, offering her a hand. "Thanks. You're not so bad yourself." Teyra took his hand, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, an acknowledgement of his skill, but also something deeper, something she hadn't anticipated. Just as the tension in the air began to ease, something unexpected happened. One of the younger Nitharan warriors, emboldened by the sparring match, stepped forward. She wasn't much older than Illyria, her silver hair tied back in a tight braid. Her eyes were wide with curiosity as she approached Daniel, her gaze fixed on him, in a way that made him uncomfortable. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "That males are different? That you have strength we do not understand?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at Illyria for guidance, but the princess merely watched with an unreadable expression. Before he could answer, the young warrior reached out, her hand brushing against his arm, as if testing its solidity. Others soon followed her lead, their curiosity getting the better of them. They moved closer, their hands reaching out tentatively, touching his uniform, feeling the muscles beneath. It wasn't aggressive, but it was overwhelming. Daniel tried to back away, but they were pressing in on all sides, their fascination quickly turning into a frenzy. What are you doing?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice calm, but the situation was spiraling out of control. "They've never seen a male before," Illyria said softly, stepping closer, but not intervening. "They want to understand." Before Daniel could protest, one of the warriors tugged at the fabric of his uniform, her fingers pulling at the seams as if trying to see what was beneath. The others followed suit, their hands tugging and pulling until, with a sharp rip, the fabric tore. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as his uniform began to fall apart under their hands, pieces of it shredding with each movement. His attempts to stop them only seemed to fuel their curiosity, and within moments, he was standing there, his clothing in tatters. The crowd of alien women stared at him, wide-eyed and speechless, their curiosity now mingled with awe. They had stripped him down without even fully understanding what they had done, their actions driven by a deep, primal need to see and touch something they had only heard about in myths. Illyria's voice broke the silence, her tone calm but laced with something that sounded like amusement. "I believe that's enough, my friends." The warriors hesitated, their hands falling away from Daniel as they realized what they had done. Their expressions shifted from awe to embarrassment, and they quickly backed away, murmuring apologies. Daniel stood there, breathing heavily, his body exposed, but his dignity still intact, barely. This isn't what I signed up for," he muttered, glancing at Illyria, who was now watching him with a mixture of fascination and amusement. "No," she said softly, "but it is educational." The silence in the training arena was thick with the weight of what had just transpired. The Nitharan warriors stood frozen, their faces flushed with embarrassment and confusion, as if they had crossed a line they hadn't fully understood. Daniel stood amidst the remains of his shredded uniform, his chest rising and falling as he tried to process what had just happened. Princess Illyria stepped forward, her expression a strange mix of apology and curiosity. She approached Daniel carefully, as though sensing the thin thread of tension that could snap at any moment. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she said softly, her voice carrying both grace and regret. "Our people have forgotten much about the time when males were a part of our world. We didn't mean to strip me down in front of everyone," Daniel interjected, though his voice held no anger, just confusion and disbelief. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the surreal feeling of the last few minutes. Illyria gave a small, almost sheepish smile. "Yes, that." She turned to the warriors, her voice becoming more authoritative. "You may all leave. I will handle this matter from here." The warriors, clearly embarrassed by their actions, quickly dispersed, leaving Daniel alone with Illyria and Tyra, who had remained silent but observant through the entire ordeal. Tyra's expression was less apologetic and more guarded, as though she had expected something like this might happen. Illyria sighed and motioned for Daniel to follow her. "Come, we should get you some new clothes and talk about what just happened." As they left the training grounds, Daniel walked in silence, his mind racing. He wasn't angry, more bewildered than anything else. He had expected to deal with cultural differences, but this was on a level he hadn't anticipated. The weight of being the first male these women had ever seen suddenly felt much heavier. They arrived at a secluded chamber within the palace, where Illyria quickly ordered attendants to bring Daniel a new set of clothes. As he changed, she stood by the window, staring out at the distant horizon. Tyra remained by the door, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Once Daniel was dressed again, Illyria turned to face him. "I owe you an apology, Sergeant. What happened back there? It was inappropriate. But you must understand, for us, males have been little more than myths for thousands of years. I'm afraid our curiosity got the better of us." Daniel nodded slowly, pulling on the last piece of his uniform. "I get it. It's just a lot to take in. I didn't expect to be the center of so much attention." Illyria's eyes softened. "You've handled yourself with far more grace than we deserved. I think many of my people will learn from this experience. We had forgotten that males are not just relics of the past. They are people, with their own experiences and dignity." Tyra, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "You are different than I expected, Sergeant. Strong, but not violent. I can see now that my assumptions were wrong." She paused, as if struggling with the next words. "I respect that." Daniel gave her a small nod. "Thanks. I didn't come here to fight, just to understand like you." Tyra's sharp gaze softened just a fraction, and she uncrossed her arms. "Perhaps there's more we can learn from each other after all." Illyria stepped forward, her tone more measured now. "This encounter will not be forgotten, Sergeant. It has taught us much about our own assumptions and about you. I hope it won't sour our alliance." Daniel smiled slightly. "No harm done, Princess. It was educational for me, too." Illyria's smile returned, this time more genuine. "I'm glad to hear it. Perhaps next time we can learn without quite so much excitement." The next morning, Daniel found himself standing on the platform at the edge of the Nitharan city, preparing to return to the human embassy. His diplomatic mission was over, and despite the chaos, it had been a success, just not in the way he had expected. Illyria and Tyra stood beside him, the light of the twin suns casting soft shadows across the landscape. The Nitharan people had gathered to bid farewell to their human guests, and the air was filled with a quiet, reflective energy. "I never thought I'd be so glad to get back to normal," Daniel muttered under his breath, though there was a hint of fondness in his voice. Illyria smiled as she stepped closer. "Normal is relative, Sergeant. I have a feeling that our people will remember this encounter for a long time. You've changed more than you realize." Daniel glanced at her, sensing the depth of her words. "I didn't do much, just tried to keep things calm." "And that, Sergeant, is why you've had such an impact," Illyria replied softly. "We have long believed that males were a thing of the past, unnecessary for our future. But you've shown us that there is strength in balance. Perhaps it's time for us to reconsider what we've lost." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. As the shuttle engines hummed to life behind him, he extended a hand to Illyria. She took it with grace, her fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "I hope this won't be the last time we meet, Sergeant," Illyria said, her eyes searching his. "I have a feeling it won't be," Daniel replied with a small smile. Tyra, standing a little off to the side, gave him a respectful nod. Though she had been skeptical from the start, it was clear now that she had come to respect him in her own way. "Safe travels, Sergeant Blake. Perhaps next time we can spar again, without the distractions." Daniel chuckled. "I'll hold you to that." As he boarded the shuttle, he took one last look at the alien city below, the elegant spires reaching toward the lavender sky. It had been a strange mission, full of surprises and lessons, but he had a feeling that it was only the beginning of something much larger. The doors closed, and the shuttle lifted off, carrying him back toward the stars. But Daniel knew that a part of him would remain on Nithara, a part that had bridged the gap between two very different worlds. As the planet faded from view, he leaned back in his seat, a faint smile tugging at his lips. So, this is what diplomacy feels like, he thought. Not bad for a soldier. Back on Nithara, Illyria and Terra stood side by side, watching the shuttle disappear into the sky. You know he'll be remembered in our history, Illyria mused, her tone thoughtful. Terra nodded. Yes, the first male we've encountered in millennia, and he was not what we expected. Illyria's gaze lingered on the horizon. I think we've only just begun to understand what he represents, for us, for our future. Terra remained silent, but in her eyes, there was a spark of agreement. The world was changing, and the presence of Sergeant Daniel Blake had opened doors they hadn't even known existed. And as the twin suns rose higher in the sky, the Nitharan people prepared to embrace a future that looked a little different than they had ever imagined.